Good afternoon, everyone. Andy Jacob here with the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. What a show today. I've been able to book Mr. Yuri Kruman. And Yuri is the founder and CEO of HR Talent and Systems. And as you know, by watching the show, we like to bring worldwide leaders in their respective fields on the show. And we've been able to book Yuri for 30 minutes. I want to get right to it, but let me just tell you right now, he is one of the leading experts in operations and strategy. He's an executive leader. He's a coach. He's an author. He's an expert in HR talent, and we're going to get into it. But before we do, Yuri, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Andy, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the conversation.
This is super amazing to have you on the show. I have so many questions, but as you know, we like to pull the lens back to 30,000 feet to start the show and tell us all about HR talent and systems.
Sure. So the company does three things, as the name suggests. Essentially coming into fast growth companies and building up the strategic HR function more or less from scratch. And that might involve things like installing performance management systems, finding ways to solicit feedback from employees, both openly and anonymously. It means sprucing up talent acquisition, partly through building up an employer brand. It's not just a better Glassdoor page, but significantly better content around what do employees, what are their stories? How do they come to work here? Why do they stay here? It's also going into advising the leadership on how people think, what are the different career pathways they should build within their company, maybe create rotational programs, any number of different initiatives to essentially help information to circulate in a much better way than it currently does. And that's kind of an 80-20 analysis of my work. I also do coaching, which essentially brings the different layers into one place for how do employees find their day-to-day, plus do they feel like there is room for growth? Do they understand what their personal and professional development looks like within the company and in general? And then it goes also into a lot of training, right? So whether that's improving time management or productivity, taking ownership and accountability, running better meetings, classical stuff, but also just helping people to express themselves. What do you have going on behind the screen? Do you have 5 kids running around and making your work super easy? That kind of stuff. Or is there something that is tactical that I can help with? Maybe better software. Essentially, what is my ethos for leadership? You have to understand your people. You have to empower them. You have to trust them. And frankly, get the hell out of the way. Let them do their job. Right? That's to me what leadership is.
That makes all the sense in the world, Yuri. Let's talk about it just a little bit, because when people reach out to you, you have such a broad umbrella of things that you're an expert in and things that you can help with. What's the typical client look like for HR talent and systems?
A typical client is usually in the Inc. 5000. They have a few hundred employees. They have some kind of HR function, but it's very tactical. So they have maybe a manager or a director running things, mostly focused on compliance, benefits, very basic kinds of things. They usually have someone who is a recruiter or sourcer, someone that just kind of brings people in the door to interview. But there's no real overarching idea for, okay, what is our brand, right? It's not just what it says above the door. It's what people think within the company about it, and the impression that others outside the company have of who are we and what are we doing here. So these are the kinds of things that these are the conditions into which usually I come in, and my work is not just about HR. HR is kind of the way into the conversation. Usually leadership, may be coming and maybe has built a family company. You hear this a lot. And now we're so big, we've never been corporate. We're not corporate animals. So help us kind of retain the family atmosphere, but at the same time build something that's more pulled up and formal. And yeah, we have policies and procedures, and we know how to hire people, and we start measuring things, right? We have some kind of analytics dashboard, something that we can use to make better decisions. within the business. And that's usually where I come in to kind of build these different layers.
Very interesting, Yuri. So when we look at the companies that you work with and they come to you and they want your advice, they want your consulting, they want your expertise, they want some of the platforms that you're able to incorporate into the system, Yuri, what's the thing that these companies really are missing with their employees these days? Is there something that the employees need that most employers are kind of missing, that they're not really providing to give those employees a meaningful experience within the company?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest thing is really twofold. It's the ability to express yourself, to be your fullest self, both at work and at home. And I talk a lot about integration. The whole premise of a work-life balance, I think, largely by this point is utter bullshit. I'm just speaking very frankly. There is no balance. We're always on our phones. We're always on Zoom. So the premise of trying to find balance, I mean, if you want to go make a bonfire on the beach somewhere and meditate, God bless you. But that's not work. That's not a way to run a business. So instead of searching for balance, let's find a better way to integrate our full selves into the spectrum of our work and life so that we're fully ourselves in both. That's what I work with. And the other, outside of self-expression, the other piece is growth. Every single one of us wants to feel like we're growing, we're moving forward somehow, right? So that's not just about money. It's not just about getting paid more, of course, but that is important. Let's not throw that to the side. It's a sense of I'm mastering something, I'm adding value, and I know where I'm moving. What is my career pathway, and how does this particular role or job or function help me within my trajectory? So, excuse me. Whereas before that might have been seen as selfish or oh, you entitled flaky millennial. Now it's just more or less commonplace. It's like, look, previous generations may have not felt the cultural um, you know pull to do that. It was not acceptable. Now it's not just acceptable, it's that's what you do. If you don't do that, you don't move forward, and no one thinks about you for promotion.
Interesting. Interesting, Yuri. When we think about the employees of these companies, they go to work, let's say they work for 8 hours a day, and we'll just use 8 to make the math simple. And then they're sleeping for 8 hours a night. And then they have another 8 hours to wake up and do their workout and watch TV at night and do this and that. So from their waking hours, they're working 50% of the time, 8 of the 16 hours. So I would imagine part of what we're talking about here is that half of your life when you're awake is at work. So why not be great at work? Why not make the commitment to be great? Because half of your life is working. You want to be great at least half of your waking hours. So how does that come across, Yuri, when these companies sort of bring you on board, and how do you capture that sort of vibe or mentality for the employees?
I think, Andy, first of all, it's a very modest estimate. I think most people, especially because of COVID and remote working, productivity has gone up, and it's not universal. It's not across all companies and all functions, but the simple fact that we don't have to commute anymore just means that we can get on earlier to our laptop. We can do Zoom calls starting earlier in the day, and we end later because we don't have to be back on the subway or in the car. So, in a way, this is what we're working with, right? And when you talk about making the best of that time, again, if you just go into a job and you get your paycheck, you don't have a second thought about personal and professional development, you're losing out. Because I talk about this in one of the articles I published recently. You are what you learn. That's where we are. We're in that kind of stage of the workforce evolution where you are what you learn, and if you're not learning, if you're not developing, if you're not making a real meaningful attempt to move forward and get more training, get coaching, you know, do some kind of personal development, you're really missing out, because you're not going to be the first person or second or third that they think of for a new role, right? Or to open a new office, or to even switch functions within the company, because okay, you're just you're checking boxes, you're clocking in, clocking out, and who are you? What's your point, right? I mean, if within the next 3 to 5 years 40% of all jobs are going to be automated by AI or some other forces or outsourced, right? Then what good are you if you're not learning? If you're whole point, in fact, I would even go further, if your whole point is not to find ways to learn and progress in what you do now, you want to work yourself out of your job, not because AI is taking over, but because you're here with much better potential for a higher role where you add more value.
I love it, Yuri. That makes all the sense in the world. You are what you learn. And for those people that want to read more about that, we'll add some links to the bottom of the interview so you can read some of Yuri's articles. He's a great author. He's a great speaker, and he's a great coach. Yuri, I want to get into a little bit when companies hire you to come in to help them with their HR situation or to improve their HR, but then they find out that you're able and your capacities are such that you can help them with so many other parts of their business as well. But before we do that, let's get on the table what's going on with the younger employees. Let's just say, the younger 20 to 30-year-old type employees. So many people have written about this and they talk about it, but from your viewpoint, what's the difference between this younger employee today from their psychological or psychographic profile versus the ones that are 40, 50, and 60 years old?
Sure. I think, first of all, we talk a lot about loss of trust in leadership, right? So whether we're talking about corporate leadership and a lot of this kind of, quarterly thinking, it's shareholder-driven thinking rather than something more long-term, something that's starting with kind of, the person in each role. It's more about, what can we publish to our shareholders? How can we increase our shareholder value? And of course, you talk about, golden parachutes and all of that good stuff. We don't need to get into that. So you start with this premise that younger people just don't buy into a lot of this corporatese, bullshit. Excuse me for using the word, but that's how it's seen. Nobody really expects anyone in corporate America, never mind in government or any institutions, to have their interests in mind. Meaning, if you're Gen Z or millennial, we're over that, right? So the flip side of this is that if I'm not for myself, who will be for me, right? So that means, again, you have to go out and you have to kill whatever you're going to eat, so to speak, right? You're going to have to learn what you learn in whatever time you're in whatever gig. So whether you're a consultant, freelancer, whatever, or okay, if you have a full-time job, if you're really top talent and now you have the benefit of being able to work almost anywhere around the world, if you're really good, right? That means that you're just wherever you are to get your logo, right? You killed your elephant, you worked for Amazon for 6 months, great, that goes into your portfolio. Now there's no longer any distinction, there's no stigma between saying, well, I'm a consultant and freelancer and I have a full-time job and I'm going to use my full-time job as leverage to get better projects for my consulting business, and I'm going to use my consulting business to get better full-time gigs, right? Because anyway, yeah, portfolio careers, we're not talking about anymore that you just you collect logos as you move from company to company as a full-time employee. You're using both. You're constantly moving from one to the other to try to get where you need to go as quickly as you can, because you got massive student loans. Again, you're not trusting anybody, whether that's boomers, Gen Xers, whoever. Like, it's just you got nobody, right? Maybe you have a rich uncle, maybe he'll help one day, maybe not. But for now, you're on your own. You're probably living in a large city, and your expenses are up to here. And maybe you don't want to move to Kansas City. Maybe your company won't let you do that, right? So you have to be extremely resourceful. You have to just not pay attention to whatever language about millennials or Gen Zs. Oh, you're entitled. You're, flaky, or I don't know. Maybe you're too risk averse if you're talking about Gen Z. You don't care. You don't care about all the blah, blah, blah. You just have to worry about your own future. How are you going to kind of do this crisscross back and forth in the fastest way possible? So there's no longer any meaningful conversation about loyalty, about, I need to stay here 5 years or even 2 years. You just go and you do that thing and you learn as much as you can and you leverage the hell out of it for the next step. And that's just the brute reality of where we are.
That is so interesting that you mentioned this, Yuri, and coming from you as one of the worldwide leading experts in HR talent and the systems that go along with it. It reminds me of a discussion I had with a younger person in Silicon Valley. He lives in San Francisco, and he said to me, he said, Andy, he said, I move from job to job because in Silicon Valley, if they don't see me moving from job to job, then they're kind of thinking something's wrong with me. Is that what we're saying? Because it's so like inverted the thought process compared to the old way of thinking.
That's exactly right. Silicon Valley just exaggerates a lot of the existing trends and exercises them beforehand. Same idea with finance, right? If you live in New York, finance has kind of been the bellwether of a lot of other things. And maybe between 3 and 5 years ago, I was working almost exclusively with people moving from finance to tech. So again, these two things, there's a lot of kind of moving back and forth. But yeah, that's exactly right. Everyone is in it for themselves. You have to. Everything is also analyzed to death so that whatever your performance is, it's almost in real time. If a company is very sophisticated, like your Twitter, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, whatever, they measure everything to death. So if your performance is good, you'll swim up right away. If your performance sucks, you'll be out quickly as well. And that's just the nature of the beast. Everything is so agile in business now at that level that you don't even bother if you're not bringing your best. And if you're bringing your best, if you're not out for your own self-interest, you're going to get gobbled up by whatever system, and they won't pay you as much because they'll keep feeding you some kind of fake perks that you don't care about.
That's very interesting, Yuri. Very interesting indeed. Now, let's talk about the companies that bring you in because they've read your articles. They know that you're a preeminent expert in the field. They bring you in to work on their HR system, maybe with an HR manager. But then they see some other things that perhaps they can lean on you for to help them in their larger picture of their company. So what are some of those things that you also can help this company that initially hired you for HR that you can move into to help them in other areas?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, HR in the classical sense is, I'm just speaking bluntly here, it's a lot of pushing paper, right? It's saying, okay, compliance, or check these boxes, or let's make sure this one, follows this law, or we make sure we do this procedure. Okay, great. In the new world, in the last maybe 3 to 5 years, there's been an explosion of great talent moving into HR. There's a lot more of this kind of analytical thinking, and there's a lot more integration, right, to use the same term, with other functions, meaning there's a realization now, and again, whether that comes the hard way or it comes out of progressive thinking, that HR really is, in a way, the leader rather than the laggard. And what do I mean by leader? Leader in digital transformation, right? A lot of companies, because of COVID, have had to scramble and say, okay, well, we don't have a good handle on who the hell's doing what anymore, right? We need better project management. Let's get on ClickUp. Or, you know what, our onboarding sucks. And before we could do things in a half-assed kind of manner. Now we can't. We have to onboard people remotely. So we need Trainual, let's say, to house all of our onboarding materials and flow and all that stuff. Okay. Or before we were sitting on some kind of secure chat platform, but that's not integrating with all these other systems, with Zoom, with Gmail, with Culture Amp, etc. We can't afford that anymore because we don't have this idea of who's doing what. Are people actually productive, right? So leadership is sitting in this kind of like in this room where they don't have visibility. They can't look out into the office and see who's there and are they pretending to work. So one reason why I come in is because I help that information circulate, right? As a coach, I speak to people, they open up to me, and I have to find a way to anonymize what they tell me so that leadership doesn't know the specific person that is giving me feedback, but they act on it, right? And the better we circulate that information, the more easily we can act upon it, the more easily we can analyze it. We can put in systems to actually take feedback and close the loop faster, right? And that spills over right into operations and business development and marketing. And from where I sit, all of these things are closely connected with how do we treat people, right? I mean, human resources in the end is, how do you treat people? Do you treat them well enough so that they want to work here? Do you find a way to empower them so that they want to stay? And do you give them the right tools to do their life's best work for you and not someone else, somewhere else?
Very interesting, Yuri, because it always comes down to how do you treat people. We have younger entrepreneurs, startup founders that watch the show, Yuri, and maybe they're starting to develop their team, because nothing's more important than having a great team behind you. As a matter of fact, right now in Silicon Valley, New York, Latin America, Asia, if you're a startup founder and you don't have an extraordinary team with you, the chance of getting funded in today's world as a solopreneur is pretty much almost nil, because everybody wants a great team, as you know. So Yuri, for these younger entrepreneurs watching the show, can you tell us the one thing, if there is one thing, that they need to think about when they're employing people, when they're hiring somebody to join their team? What's the one thing, if there is one thing, that they need to keep in mind at all times to get the most out of that person?
No one, I think, who starts a company, with few exceptions, will have come from building an HR function. It's extremely rare. So I'm not expecting anyone to come in with this, magical HR thinking and ways to empower everyone. Very rare. Maybe, hopefully, as more women become funded, from the VC side of things as they build companies, I think more of this will percolate into workforces from the beginning. A lot of what happens in practice is, who gets funded? It's people who go to Harvard, Penn, Stanford, and Yale, right? And they have that network of people that can fund them. And in the end, you have a lot of bro culture, because those are the people that get funded. Those are the people that are able to grow their companies, and they're the most aggressive in their negotiations. And they see the same kinds of people in the VC world that go to the same schools. So as we kind of get more diverse, as we get more women, we get more people of color in the VC world, also as founders, within their internal ecosystems, this will change. For now, it's still very pale in all senses. So the way that founders can get ahead of this, and it's not because it's bad PR, it's certainly bad PR in our world, but for the right reasons, you have to start with alignment, right? Alignment is not someone was in your frat house back in college and they look like you and they sound like you and they agree with you on every subject. That's not alignment, right? You want to get a multitude of opinions, you want to get a multitude of backgrounds, professional experiences. All of this kind of thing should live with you in the same room so that you can build something that has a stronger foundation from the start. And in order to do that, you have to get a bit vulnerable and tell your own story and see whether people resonate with that, whether they align with it, not just with your promise of fat paychecks and equity materializing one day. That's the way to build a solid company.
I love it, Yuri. I tell you, HR isn't what it once was, and for these larger companies that hire you, they're very smart, because they understand that it's a fluid situation in HR. Things change, the psychographic profiles of their employees change, the way they're thinking about the world changes, and it takes sometimes an outside person like a consultant like Yuri to come in, take a look at it, and understand what's happening underneath the hood, if you will, and that's what's made you so successful in your business. Now, I'd like to take this conversation, Yuri, if you don't mind, and I know you've only cut out a certain amount of time. You're helping so many amazing companies that I really appreciate the time you spent with us thus far, and I've had so many questions for you that I think I've gotten answered, and I have a couple more for you. When we look at the younger entrepreneurs watching the show, they're going to look at this and they're going to say to themselves, how did this gentleman become one of the leaders in his field? I mean, has it always been easy for him? Has he always, had a smooth sailing kind of a situation? And you and I both know that doesn't typically happen for entrepreneurs. So maybe you could talk to the younger entrepreneurs the same way that maybe you perhaps talk to some of the employees of these large companies that hire you, and sort of let them know that, it's okay that they make some mistakes, and when they do, what to do about and how to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, we could spend hours on this, but let's try not to. The road has been anything but smooth. I'm very open about all my struggles and failures and all the dead ends. I mean, I'm in my sixth career, right? I'm turning 38 next week, God willing. So the point is, if I'm able, to talk about whatever paltry measure of success I have now, despite all of that, it's not despite, it's because of. That's a very important point, right? Because when we hear about Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates, and this one dropped out of Harvard, this one dropped out of Stanford, how representative is that, right? How realistic is our picture of what's behind those people? Whether it's networks, whether it's Lawrence Summers investing some kind of 50K in a company up front, or crickets, right? Or someone that comes from a non-traditional background, doesn't look like all those Stanford, Harvard, Penn people. And I'm a Penn person myself. No shame in that, right? You have to understand that whatever your path is, just keep going. Number one. Number two, get better at whatever you're trying to figure out. Just get better at it. Focus on your personal and professional development. Invest in that above everything else. And see whatever your journey is as, it's not unique in its components, but it's unique in the sense of you're here, God put you here on this earth for a particular mission. So figure out what that mission is, then go and figure out how to monetize it, whether you're working for someone else, you're working for yourself, you're growing, you're moving forward, and you're taking, for the good and the bad from each experience. And it's not a question of, when you will build it. It's just what will you build? The timeline may be shorter or longer depending on, various circumstances, but you have to build something that is aligned with who you are and that helps the largest number of people in the world through your gifts. So you have to figure out what those gifts are, what is your mission, then figure out the way through which you will transmit your energy and brilliance and experience through the world. But there is no such thing as here I am, and I'm successful overnight. That's garbage. No one that has any meaningful success, including everyone that went to all those great schools and grew up with silver spoons, they also have challenges. It's not like you just magically arrive one day where you were. No one of value really does that. You have to fight.
I love it. You have to fight. I love it. You have to ask the questions. How do you treat people? And I think I see a best-selling book in your future, Yuri, called You Are What You Learn, because I love that. And that really is what it's all about. And you're able to encapsulate this entire business model that you've built, helping so many amazing companies with their HR systems, through HR talent and systems, by that little coin phrase, which I think is you are what you learn. And it's just so meaningful and so impactful. And it really resonates for me. And I'm sure it will resonate for our viewers. Yuri, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on the show today. How can people reach out to you at HR Talent and Systems? Should they just go on the website, or how do they get a hold of you, Yuri, to start talking about how they can make an impact with their HR and the entire internal system that they have?
Sure. So the website for the company is HRTalentsys, HRTalentsys.com. And if you want to learn more about the rest of my work, just go to YuriKruman.com, YuriKruman.com. And you're going to learn about my current book, which I just put out. It's called Be Your Own Commander-in-Chief.
I love it, Yuri. I love it. Let's. I know you only have a little bit of time, but let's extend it out just a little bit more, because I want to talk about that book. Okay, I want to talk about the book, Be Your Own Commander-in-Chief, right?
Yep.
It's such a great title. I mean, I'm already hooked on the book. I want to buy it right now. Let's talk about that book. What's the fabric of the book? Did you bring all of your years of experience and put it into this one new book that you have? How did that come about? And tell us about the book.
Yeah, the book is pretty much all the best things that I've learned and all the best things that I've taught so far to date, at my 37 plus years old. I would say that the book is about really looking at your life through the language of through language and psychology, through that lens. And the reason is because I found that behavioral change, again, learning, what is learning for it, so that you can change your behavior, change your viewpoint, and get closer to some kind of truth. Because why are we all here, right? We're, at least in the biggest frame of things, we're looking for truth. We're trying to understand how the world works, how we can help other people, okay? So the behavioral change framework it has 4 parts to it. Imagine you have Maslow's hierarchy, or you're climbing up a mountain. Number 1 is your foundation of your conversation with your body. So how do you do fitness? How do you do nutrition, sleep, biorhythms, etc. Number 2 is your mental models and life skills. So what is your worldview? What are the elements in that stack of how you approach life in general? Yourself, other people, and what happens out in the world, okay? How do you manage expectations? How do you make decisions? How do you manage your stress? Yeah, and how do you manage your finances and side hustle and career, right? Then you move up and you talk about dealing with other people. So that's more classical coaching stuff. Essentially, how do you deal with your advisors, investors, employees, employers, vendors? Oh yeah, and your wife or husband and kids and parents, right? How do you do that from a central place of values, right? What do you need to deliver a value to those people, your stakeholders in your life? And also, how do you make sure to derive value from them, right? In some kind of systematic, thoughtful way. And then as you're going up to the top of that mountain, you have to think about, well, what's my conversation with God or the universe, right? Or whatever your framework may be. So that's looking into how do I feel part of something greater than myself? So that's community, that's rituals, that's meditation, prayer, what have you, right? And then the 4 pieces help you to create a framework for how you should approach every single day and week and month and year. How can you check in with yourself to make sure you're on the right track, that you're learning, that you're moving, that you're growing, that you're finding your alignment within your life, that you're finding your purpose, you're trying to understand how to create impact in the world. And of course, if you do all those things, you will inevitably find success.
I love it. Wow. Well, we're going to put a link in the program for people that want to read the new book by Yuri Kruman, How to Be Your Own Commander-in-Chief. Very interesting. Yuri, you live with compassion. You can tell you live with modesty. You live with kindness. This is absolutely awesome. Thank you so much, Yuri, for coming on the show. I've been waiting to get you on now for about 4 weeks, and to book you in has been a real honor and a real pleasure. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Andy, thank you so much for having me. Terrific conversation.